Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are continuing to preview both tonight's Thursday night football matchup and the upcoming weekend, now coming at it from the perspective of fantasy football. And I just talked about my main keys to the game for both of these teams tonight from a general football perspective, but I think it reflects pretty well that I think there are points that are going to be scored tonight. I'm anticipating both of these defenses having some amount of trouble at least. I think that Josh Allen and Tua Tagovailoa, they're pretty much must starts anyways every single week, that I have no doubts there, but I think the two of them can be some of the top fantasy football performers of the weekend as a whole. I would probably lean on Josh Allen for that number one spot, but again, I think that Tua is facing a very favorable defense against the Buffalo Bills that, again, we'll see how the running game works out. Devin Achane is dealing with that ankle injury that I don't think we have official word yet on whether or not he's going to be available for them. So we'll see. Running game wasn't great last week. Now you add this into the mix. I think the Dolphins are going to throw the ball, and either way, I think that this is a secondary that can be thrown on. So I am anticipating Tua to let it rip a little bit tonight, which of course also leads to either one of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Again, both players that are a little bit must starts anyways, but Tyreek is probably, the direction I would head in. Of people that wide receivers that probably have the highest upside for week 2 across the entire NFL as a whole. Now, obviously, Bills are probably going to try and fixate on him, but I just think it's a personnel mismatch, and I really don't think that there's anybody on that Bills defense that's going to be able to consistently keep up with Tyreek Hill. But Jalen Waddle would be another starter as well. Again, have concerns with the running game for Miami, so I'd probably steer away from that direction, especially considering I do think that the strength of the Bills defense is on that front line. On the Buffalo side of this game, we just had a comment asking about Keon Coleman's upside as a flex option for tonight. I do feel like, especially, and what we talked about in the last segment as well, is it's excellent that Josh Allen can, run around on his own and create magic. But that being said, he did end up injuring his hand on one of those touchdown rushes in the second half of the Arizona game. I think at some point in this past week, somebody probably sat down with Allen and said, hey, I understand that you can do all of these incredible things with your legs, but that is not a sustainable form of offense for us and for you to stay healthy for the upcoming season. And obviously, Josh Allen is basically the offense. So I think when it gets to those red zone opportunities, that he is going to try and trust his receivers a little bit more. Keon Coleman has the frame, the body, and going back to his time at Florida State, the tape to be able to be a red zone target. So I definitely see him being in that category. I also know that Dalton Kincaid is somebody that a lot of fantasy owners were panicking about a little bit after week 1, but he's somebody that I think can do it in the open field while also doing it in the red zone as well. I'm very high on Dalton Kincaid, and I think that he could be a huge performer for them as well. So again, I'm definitely going to be paying attention to what is the Bills' approach when it comes to the red zone, because I think they're going to have to find a way to further develop that passing game and the trust between Josh Allen and his weapons. That being said, though, I also think that James Cook could have a very big night for himself. Now, I do really like the personnel on Miami's defense as well. You have a lot of big name guys on that front line. We mentioned Calais Campbell in the last segment, talking about the impact that he had week 1 against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which was great to see. At this point, Campbell, he's got to be in his late 30s, 37, 38 years old. The fact that, he had maybe a little bit of a down season last year, but is somebody that is looking to reestablish himself once again. Zach Sealer is one of the most underrated defensive linemen in the NFL, so Not trying to go on too much of a defense kick here because obviously we're fixating on fantasy football, but I think that it's going to be a tough task, but James Cook is a very good running back. We've seen the increased usage of him from really, I'd say about halfway through last season to now, that I think the Bills are really going to try and lean on that rushing game as well. And again, just make sure that Josh Allen doesn't have to be the one doing everything himself. So I like James Cook as a starter tonight. And the one other name I'll throw in there as well for Buffalo is, I think as a long shot, Khalil Shakir could be a very interesting piece because last week we saw it was a little bit touchdown reliant. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown. We just talked about red zone. It was a little bit of a quick out to Shakir there, who does have the athletic ability to be able to make plays happen. So Shakir, somebody also was developing a better rapport with Josh Allen through the latter half of last season. Really, once they started to turn away from Stephon Diggs, I thought that we saw more opportunities for Shakir. And the way that this Dolphins defense is, I think that they're a lot more strong. They're a lot stronger on the perimeter with their cornerbacks and their safeties. I think it's going to leave opportunities for opposing slot receivers to carve out some bigger roles for themselves. That's where Shakir plays. And while Jalen Ramsey definitely could be following Keon Coleman around now, under the new system that the Dolphins have with Anthony Weaver, that it could open up some opportunities for Shakir. So ultimately, that's sort of my general output on fantasy football for tonight, but we got a whole weekend ahead as well that I sort of want to run through quickly here, and I'm just going to be listing some of my number 1 options for this upcoming weekend. Like I mentioned, I'm huge on Josh Allen or Tua. I think that Josh Allen could have the number 1 fantasy week this week for quarterbacks, but if I were going to go away from this game as well, I do really like Jaden Daniels versus the Giants. I almost feel bad about it because I feel like everybody's just kicking the Giants while they're down right now. And I don't want to be unfair in that way. It's more so just that, realistically speaking, I think that this is going to be even maybe a little bit more of a high-scoring game, considering the fact that I'm not a believer in Washington's defense. We'll see. This could be sort of a moment for Dan Quinn to kind of prove the haters wrong in that aspect after getting torn up from Baker Mayfield last week. That I think Jaden Daniels is going to be tasked with matching points on the board, and this Giants defense is a lot more susceptible to that. I would still like to probably see further development from Daniels as a passer, but already the running impact with him was immediate, and I think it's going to roll into this upcoming week where the Giants are a team that can probably, test the Commanders a little bit in terms of not allowing Jaden Daniels to just be stagnant. At that point, the Commanders were kind of out of the game faster last week. I think this is going to be a much more competitive game within the division, and ultimately, I think that Jaden Daniels has huge upside for week 2. Running back, I'm looking at Bijan Robinson, one of the best running backs in the league. Not exactly a hot take. I do understand that, but playing the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday Night Football, the Eagles, I don't think their defense is quite as bad as they showed against the Packers last Friday in Brazil. I think that was just a weird game as a whole with all of those circumstances, and I am higher on the Eagles this year than I was last year. That being said, though, the defense is definitely the main concern for Philadelphia, and a lot of it comes within that front 7. I don't think it's a particularly excellent linebacking group, so especially if you are in a PPR league, I think that Bijan can sort of rack up some points there as well as on the ground. This is a team that, they do have some good defensive linemen, but I think that the Falcons are going to be able to have rushing success. Very disjointed last week, but I thought they actually moved at the point of attack pretty well on the offensive line. Didn't do a great job of protecting Kirk Cousins in the pocket. Probably also contributes to the fact that maybe he looks to get it out a little bit quicker. Bijan out of the backfield could be an option there. So that's my number 1 running back for this upcoming week. Another name that I'll throw out there as well, I have a couple ones. Derrick Henry playing the Raiders this week. Now, John Harbaugh did just say earlier this week that the days of Henry being a 30 carries per game type of player is probably behind him. I do have some hesitations about what his role will be with Baltimore, but I also don't think that Lamar Jackson can run as much as he did last week, that they're probably going to try and steer away from that. And Henry, really outside of that first drive, wasn't used very much, and I think that anytime that the Ravens are in the red zone, that's where they're going to be going, is Derrick Henry. Plus, I think we see a little bit more production from him in the open field as well. And then I do want to also mention Kyren Williams. I think that it's a good matchup against Arizona that, again, schematically, I like Zach Gannon, but the overall talent on that defense isn't necessarily there yet. My one issue with him, and I did have him at the number one till taking into consideration that offensive line is banged up right now. It's going to be without 3 of their starters, but that being said, it could actually contribute also to the idea of Matt Stafford looking to get the ball out quick, like he did a lot in that first half when, he was still sort of first trying to find the groove and the chemistry with his offensive linemen. That now with all these injuries, I think the game plan for McVay and that offense is going to be quick throws. So I think that involves Kyren Williams against a poorer defense in Arizona. And I think that includes Cooper Kupp as well, where he got 21 targets, I believe it was, last week. Ridiculous there. I think that with Puka Nacua on the injured reserve list, we're going to see a Cooper Kupp sort of big focus, a real focus on Cooper Kupp for this upcoming week to just try and get the ball in his hands and make things happen. And again, Arizona defense that is probably susceptible, at least to some degree, in the passing game there as well. And then to close it out here, tight ends. Obviously, week 1 was not a favorable game not a favorable set of games for tight end owners across the country. And you got to think that eventually somebody is going to bounce back here. Now, I have mentioned multiple times here this Rams game. I think on the other side, Trey McBride could be somebody who could really emerge for the Cardinals. The Rams defense looked excellent relative to my expectations in week 1 against the Lions, a very good offense. So I do want to give them credit there, but they are still young, and there's a lot of moving pieces there. New defensive coordinator after Raheem Morris left in the offseason, that I would probably lead McBride as the number 1 tight end, but I don't feel super confident necessarily about any one of them in particular. I guess honorable mentions out there to Kelsey, who wasn't quite as involved in week 1 against Baltimore, maybe just for the sake of confidence and just showing people that Kelsey is still here. They could maybe look to force feed him a little bit against a Cincinnati team that feels like right now they are vulnerable. I'm a little bit worried that people are so down on the Bengals that they could end up having a big bounce back performance, but those would probably be my top 2 tight ends for the upcoming weekend. But let me know who you like, who you don't like in this upcoming weekend of fantasy football. Like I mentioned, sort of talked a lot about the Rams and their injuries in this segment, and that's because things have gotten very messy with them very quick based off of their week 1 performance, having to put 3 players on the injured reserve list already. So I want to further dive into what the latest is on Puka Nacua and where the Rams are at right now, sitting at 0-1 with a number of key injuries already starting to build up. So we will be diving into that. But first, we're going to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.